This is episode number 2 on a series highlighting some of the greatest conquerors in all of Earth's history. We will be covering the life and accomplishments of Zenobia, a queen of the ancient empire of Palmyra. Even though not much is discussed about her accomplishments and many people do not know about her, the importance of Zenobia's actions are understated and have impacted the modern day greatly. In this installment, we will be covering her origin, conquest, and the empire that she brought to greatness. Okay, now let's get started. The year is 270 CE. A large contingent of Palmyrene soldiers have been sent by Zenobia and already successfully captured Egypt. Now they just have to defend themselves and their newly acquired dominion. The opposing Roman general, Probus, has fled to a fortified hill, far from the battlefield in the city of Alexandria. Locked up in a castle, the Palmyrene general needed to flush him out, and using their advanced knowledge of the terrain, he successfully captured him. The Roman army surrendered, and the Palmyrene Empire, led by Zenobia, successfully captured Egypt. Zenobia was born in 240 CE in the empire she would later rule over, Palmyra. Palmyra was a territory controlled by Rome that held power from the 1st and 2nd century CE. It is now largely inhabited, and the site contains many relics and ruins. We'll go over Palmyra and Zenobia's impact on Palmyra in much more detail later. She was born a citizen of Rome, but although adept at speaking in both Roman and Greek, was much more fluent in Egyptian and Aramaic. She famously stated that she was descended from Cleopatra of Egypt and Dido of Carthage, but she also may have just been of Arab descent. Her childhood was not poor, but she was not too rich. However, her family was Palmyrene and somewhat influential. During this time, she learned many skills, such as great skill in hunting and horse riding. Overall, although many primary sources are conflicting with each other on what actually happened and did not happen, most can agree that she possessed many impressive abilities that foreshadowed her success as a monarch in the future. Zenobia's rise to power within the Palmyrene area can only be described as extremely rapid. In 258 CE, she married Lucius Septimus Odenathus, or for simplicity, just Odenathus. Odenathus held the position of governor of Syria within the Roman Empire, and he controlled a rich area with significant influence due to the Silk Road trade route passing through the region. Gaining power due to fighting off the king of Persia, Shapur I, Odenathus was granted the title of governor of Syria for avenging the Roman Empire. Odenathus did try conquering other areas in Asia around him and actively expanded his territory. However, he was always submissive to Rome, starkly in contrast to Zenobia, as we will later see. In 267 CE, something happened that completely changed history forever. There are conflicting accounts of this, but apparently, during a hunting trip, Odenathus and his heir, Herodes, were assassinated. Other accounts say he was killed by his cousin Maeonius, or even killed by Zenobia herself, although all of these are most likely untrue. Regardless, since both him and his heir were dead, Zenobia took power. Although technically not a queen, because she was a regent for her son Valabathus, Zenobia held all the power and made all the decisions. She took power around 267 or 268 CE. After taking power, Zenobia started out by following most of the policies set by the dead Odenathus. This meant that in the beginning of her reign, she had a peaceful relationship with Rome. Even though in the beginning her reign was peaceful, she still expanded the court and surrounded herself with many scholars. Among these scholars was the philosopher Cassius Longinus, who apparently aided her in planning many of the campaigns that she would start. Before we go over the specific campaigns, a little bit of context is necessary to understand why Zenobia expanded lands and did some of the things she did military-wise. During that period of time, the strongest empire in the world, Rome, was going through some problems within itself called the crisis of the 3rd century. The crisis started out after Emperor Severus Alexander was killed by his own troops. It had already been going on for a long time, but it can broadly be described as a period of extreme instability in the Roman Empire. In the span of 50 years, 26 emperors had been gone through, and the Roman Empire lost major territories such as Gaul, Hispania, and the Palmyrene Empire. Rome was being constantly invaded, and losing territory it once had left and right until the Battle of Naissus. The Battle of Naissus was a critical point in the crisis of the 3rd century, and a Roman victory led by Claudius Gothicus foreshadowed incoming stability in the empire. Eventually, a new Emperor Aurelian restored peace. Anyways, why is the crisis of the 3rd century important? It allowed many enemies that were once subordinates to Rome, such as the Palmyrene Empire, to attack it. With the new power vacuum created, Zenobia seized the opportunity to try to expand nearby as rapidly as possible. Looking eastward, they saw Anatolia, the region roughly corresponding to modern-day Turkey. Not much is known about the campaign, but it was quick, short, and simple. Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire quickly captured the territory, reaching as far as the city of Ankara. Once again, Zenobia saw this as the best time to try to capture some Roman territories and expand her empire. This time, she looked westward, and one of the territories that belonged to Rome that was ripe for the taking was Egypt. It was near Palmyra, and the Roman Emperor was busy fighting enemies far from Egypt. She had many generals, but the figure that led the actual Palmyrene army into Egypt was a general named Zabda. Zabdas, or Septimius Zabdas, was the successor of Odenathus as the supreme commander of the Palmyrene army. A skilled general with his full loyalty towards Zenobia and Palmyra, he was a great candidate to lead the invasion. During this time, a rebel of Syrian descent named Timagenes would help the Palmyrene Empire. The forces of Timagenes and Zabdas, along with the fact that the Roman military that would normally be in Egypt was off fighting the Goths, completely destroyed all remaining Roman control of Egypt. And now we arrive at the point in history we started at. The Roman commander, Probus, rushed back into Egypt to combat the Palmyrene army. Slowly, Probus was gaining back land and was pushing back the army of Zabdas. However, the Palmyrene army got together, organized, and repelled the Romans, centering their campaign on the city of Alexandria. At this point, the situation was pretty grim for the Roman general Probus, and he retreated. Zabdas, continuing to attack, caught up to him and defeated Probius for good. The invasion of Egypt was finally over, and it was an astounding victory for Zenobia. While Egypt was being conquered, the home front was being attacked by many tribes of Arabic origin that were not content with being ruled by the Palmyrene Empire. For example, one prominent group was the Tannic Confederation. Eventually, all these rebelling groups and peoples were subjugated. One issue was the city of Chalcedon refused to align with Zenobia, and this would be a major problem in the future. Nevertheless, Palmyrene control and influence kept growing in the region. Coins with Valabathus, which was the son of Zenobia and supposed ruler of Palmyra, like mentioned before, on one side, the Roman Empire on another were being made, which showed the power of Zenobia. She even gave herself the title of Augusta, something that was only held for the Empire of Rome. By the year 271 CE, Palmyra was practically unopposed in the region of Asia Minor, while having control of Egypt as well. During all this time that the Palmyrene Empire was expanding, the Roman mainland was still toiling through the aforementioned crisis. Some stability was finally achieved, with Emperor Claudius Gothicus replacing the assassinated Gallienus. However, even Claudius was then killed, and after a brief period of rule from his brother, a figure named Aurelian took the throne. Aurelian came from a military background and affirmed his power. Realizing that the empire was in shambles and completely divided, he went on a so-called quest to reclaim all the lost land. This made Aurelian a natural enemy of Zenobia. After fighting off tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, and Alemanni, Aurelian looked east towards Palmyra. Marching down with his army, he quickly captured many bordering towns that were allies of Palmyra. Zenobia did not have time to recollect all her troops and get Zabdas to march back. Finally, after capturing the city of Tyana, most other cities did not resist and often automatically surrendered. Then after entering Syria, the Roman and Palmyrene armies finally came to a head at the Battle of Ime. The two generals, like expected, were Zabdas representing Zenobia and the Palmyrenes, and Aurelian representing the Romans. There, Aurelian won the battle for a couple of reasons. One was that Zabdas' troops were tired from the journey, and the terrain was better suited for the Roman army. Second is that the Roman army may have had an element of surprise. Initially, when the Palmyrene army was on higher ground, the Romans utilized a testudo formation in the beginning to withstand the attack. After both armies were on equal ground, the Romans feigned a retreat, routed the opposing forces, and defeated them. After this defeat to the Romans, there's not much left of the Palmyrene army. Zenobia fled with her son Valabathus to the city of Emesa. There, the remainings of her army was defeated, and once again she went to Palmyra. Now, after the Romans attacked the main city of Palmyra and she tried to escape their clutches, she was captured. What happened next has some conflicting accounts, but she was for sure brought by Aurelian to Rome. Some say she was acquitted and died peacefully. Others say she was paraded through the streets of Rome in chains and then forced to retire. The actual Palmyrene Empire did not last very long, but reached the zenith and golden age of its short life under the rule of Zenobia. It was founded in the 1st century by Rome and is located in the modern-day country of Syria, in the Middle East area of Asia. The region was under Rome's control under the 3rd century, when it practically became independent under Odenathus. Of course, we know what happened next, with the assassination of Odenathus and the rise of Zenobia. Already a flourishing empire due to trade, Zenobia expanded Palmyrene control to nearby regions. This made the riches of the empire, especially the capital city of Palmyra, increase a lot since the Silk Road trade route passed through more of the empire. They also had access to the Red Sea, which meant more trade for them, since access to a body of water is an extra method of trade and transportation. Zenobia also made many coins, like mentioned before, that were a symbol of power and wealth. These coins featured the head of people such as Zenobia, her son Valabathus, and Aurelian. Overall, Zenobia was a very, very good leader who increased her empire's wealth and territory significantly during the time she held power. After Zenobia was captured by Aurelian and brought to Rome, the empire was pretty much completely under Roman control. The city of Palmyra also revolted against Aurelian, and in response to this act of betrayal, Aurelian razed the city completely. Today, only a couple of ruins remain of the city. It remained a somewhat important city because of trade, but slowly declined and became irrelevant. While Palmyra was under control of the Roman army, Odenathus was the commander of all its army. It controlled all the forces, and the military was practically autonomous from Rome. When Odenathus died, he was replaced as the head of the military by Zabdas, who, as we know, then led the major campaigns of the Palmyrene Empire while Zenobia was queen. Not much is known about the composition of the army, since the Palmyrene Empire and the army did not live very long before it was absorbed back by the Romans. We definitely do know that the primary method of travel for them was by foot, although the army was not slow by any means. Their army did have a section of very skilled archers, and we do know that their soldiers were heavily armored when going into war. In fact, this is one of the reasons as to why Zenobia was defeated by Aurelian at the Battle of Ime, like mentioned before. Most separate armies also had a section of cavalry that was pretty good. The military had soldiers dispersed around in most major cities, but when not at war, most were located in the capital city of Palmyra and then at Emesa, where the treasury was located. An elite section of their army was also composed of Bedouin fighters that attacked very rapidly and could cover large distances in a given time. Overall, the army was great at the time. However, they lost to the Romans because they had better tactics. The magnitude of the impact that the actions of Zenobia have had on history is immense. Firstly, she is one of the only people to separate from Rome. The formation of a separate Palmyrene Empire and its rise to power was the beginning of a very slow decline of the Western Roman Empire, even though in the end Rome did reclaim its lost possessions. Additionally, the military campaigns changed the destinies of countless lives from the citizens of her empire to the other enemies of Rome fighting in the north. The life and story of Zenobia also affected the arts very much. Although there are many examples, some prominent works featuring Zenobia include the heroine of 3 operas, a tragedy by dramatist Arthur Murphy, and the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Countless less major facets of society throughout the ages have been impacted greatly by the actions of Zenobia as well. Overall, she was immensely important to society today, and we cannot understate this. Finally, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Great Conquers podcast, make sure to stay tuned for future installments in this series. Both a document with all the sources and a script for this episode will be linked in the description below. Once again, thank you for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the podcast.